Hey everyone, this is Hanney Critical Faculty, and today we are going to be discussing the evolution of God. And today I've got Edward Dodge with me in the studio today to talk about this very topic. Hello, Edward.
Hello, Hanney. How you doing? Thank you for
Very
having
good.
me here. It's nice to be here.
Nice. May I call you Ed?
Yeah, Ed. I prefer Edward. Edward's just for print, but yeah, you can call me Ed.
Fantastic. Ed, I want to start with this interesting backstory that you're in pursuit of one opiate. You stumbled upon the ultimate opiate of the masses.
Yeah, right. So so this is my book. I wrote. It's called A History of the Goddess from the Ice Age to the Bible, and it's all about the various goddesses that are in the Bible, that in the Old Testament, that people aren't really familiar with. Asherah being the main one. And I got into the story because I have been studying the history of cannabis, marijuana, for a long time, like as a hobby, since I was a college student, basically, because it's fascinating because it's the hemp fibers and the drugs, and they both go back to the dawn of the Neolithic, and there's this unbroken thread of history that you can see marijuana all the way through human history, like literally at any point in time where the plant is grown. I'm talking about because it wasn't in the Americas, but in the Middle East and stuff. It's always been there. So both as the fiber and the drugs, for all of European history, all of Chinese history, all of Eurasian history, it was always there. And it's in the Bible. So there's some references to it. This is a little bit controversial scholarship, but the modern scholars will tell you that there's 5 references to cannabis. The name is canna or cannabism in the original Hebrew, and that they get mistranslated in the English text. I don't know how it shows up in Arabic, but in the English text, it shows up in as the plant's either calamus or the words aromatic cane, which doesn't really mean anything. And the most important reference is that it's an ingredient in Moses' holy anointing oil in Exodus 30:23, and it's one of 5 ingredients. And that's critical. Like, this is one of the furnishings for the tabernacle. The anointing oil is critical. They anoint. It represents it's what separates the sacred from the secular, the sacred from the profane. They anoint all the objects, the Ark of the Tabernacle, the menorah, plus the priests and the kings. And all the kings of the house of David are all anointed with this holy anointing oil, including Jesus Christ. So the anointing oil is really key. And marijuana is an ingredient in it. And so, but it shows up as either calamus, is what the other traditional scholarship says, is plant calamus, but calamus doesn't really make sense. If you tried to make that concoction out of calamus, it's not really a thing. But you make it out of marijuana, I can guarantee you it's a thing. Like, it's very potent, very psychoactive. And if you bathe your head, like pour it all over your head like they would have done, it's a very intoxicating experience. And in the right setting where you're trying to have a spiritual experience of it, it definitely could be, it definitely makes sense. And then the other references have it as an offering in the temple of Yahweh, or in the original temple there, and it's listed as a trade good. There's 5 references there in my book. Oh, it's in the Song of Songs. Also, it's one of the things, the beautiful aromatic flowers that compare to the beauty of the bride in the Song of Songs. So it's all these critical parts, and it perfectly makes sense. And so then my question was, all right, so if it's part of the original Hebrews, but then it's not part of Hebrew tradition today. It's not part of the Judeo-Christian today that marijuana is not sacred, right? So at some point, there was a transition. At some point, it got thrown out. And I wanted to know at what point in history, because we could identify this point in history politically, like what happened. Like, there was a moment in time when someone said, we no longer like marijuana. Like, we used to like it and now we don't. And so in doing this research, I learned about Asherah, and that the scholars talk about this character Asherah, who's listed 40 times in the Old Testament, that she was the wife of God. And I was utterly dumbfounded. I cannot tell you how dumbfounded I was to learn this, because I had grown up going to church. I'd gone to Sunday school, K through 12. So for me, that's right through high school through turning 18. My entire youth, I'd gone to church. My parents were not super religious. They're relatively agnostic. But we went because it was, the community and the neighborhood, and my grandparents went, and all this stuff. It was what you do. So we went to church, and I went to Sunday school, and I read the Bible a lot. Now, we were not fundamentalists. The church was not fundamentalist. We were taught to read it in the sort of what do you think? And like look for naturalistic explanations. Very, very, we're Presbyterians. It's very Protestant, very like educated Presbyterian kind of church in Washington, D.C., where I grew up. So like, government types in there. And so we were not fundamentalists. And then I went to Catholic high school just by chance, which was a very good school. And so all these years of going to church, I'd never heard of Ishtar. I'd never heard the name mentioned even once, or the concept that there was a wife of God. And I was utterly shocked. And I wanted to know more, like, who is this character? And more importantly, who are the people that were following her? If you believed in the wife of God, what were your beliefs? Like, who is this? Like, how does this compute to this Bible story I've always been taught? And long story short, what I learned was that the original Israelites were pagans before they became monotheists, which makes sense. And there was not monotheism back in the beginning of time. In fact, it was a pagan culture. And that the story we're seeing in the Old Testament of the rise of Yahweh is that is of a reformation, a cultural reformation, every bit as profound as the Protestant Reformation in Europe or other religious schisms at other points in history. Because like humans have reformations every few centuries when the old ideas don't make sense anymore and they want to turn over the culture and turn over traditions. And the Old Testament, they're wanting to get rid of things. They want to get rid of idolatry. Like they decide idolatry, like having the gods in a statue and that you're going to pray to the statue and put the clothes on the statue every day. The Hebrews are or the followers of Yahweh in particular are saying, no, we don't want to do that anymore. That's dumb. It's a dumb idea. And then other people are saying, we've been doing this for thousands of years. How dare you, blaspheme our traditions? Likewise, they want to get rid of infant sacrifice and child sacrifice, which was a thing that they were definitely doing in Canaan, because we have the Canaanites and the Phoenicians have the same religion, same people, same culture. So the Phoenicians were the dominant power in the Mediterranean prior to the Greeks and Romans. And so we have a lot of archaeology from the Phoenicians. And so we know that they did infant sacrifice because we've got the burial grounds in Carthage in particular, but other places too. But Carthage has the big one. The third thing they want to get rid of is the priestesses and the ritual sex that they had, because they're very much of a sexual culture, and they practice ritual prostitution and ritual sex. It was very common. There's lots of evidence of it in Babylon, and lots of literature about it. The Greeks talk all about it.
So Edward, I mean, this one thing that I stumbled upon, the matriarchal aspect to
because they were matriarchal before they were patriarchal. So the farther back in history you go.
Sex was completely understood to be a different thing. Instead of being dirty and something to be ashamed of, it was celebrated.
It was absolutely celebrated. It was 100% celebrated. Sex makes the flowers grow. They call them fertility cults. That's what the scholarship always calls them. But they're really nature-based religions. And they believe in nature and the cycles of life and the turning of the seasons. And all of their most important rituals are these resurrection cycles that they call the dying and rising gods. These are all goddess stories about the turning of the seasons that are tied to the cycles of nature and the rebirth of the spring every year. So it's the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece with Demeter and Persephone, where Persephone is going to come out from the underworld half the year. Ishtar and Tammuz in Babylon, which is also the Hebrew culture. You've got in Isis and Osiris in Egypt, Cybele and Cybele's got one, Aphrodite and Adonis. There's a whole bunch of them. The big ones, though, are Demeter and the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece we know a lot about. The Isis mysteries we know a lot about. Ishtar and Tammuz we know a lot about. Other ones we don't know as much about. But in the Canaanites have Baal and Anat, where Baal is brought back to life by Anat, who is another one of these Israelite goddesses who we can talk about. She's like Kali. She's kind of badass. But anyway, so these are matriarchal traditions, as you said, and these are the old school goddess traditions that are from deep in the Neolithic. They've been for thousands of years. We don't really know the details, but we know because at the time that writing is invented, these are the prominent. This is the number one religion, and And so from the time of the whole Bronze Age, this is what they're doing. They got Ishtar in Babylon. Inanna was before her back in Uruk. And then Ishtar is Astarte in the Bible. And so it's all these same traditions. The Israelites have the same tradition. For them, it's Astarte and Tammuz. And Tammuz is one of the names of the months in the Hebrew calendar. So we know that this is their tradition. Tammuz is the dying, rising god. He goes to the underworld half the year and comes back the other half of the year. In Ezekiel, he talks about the women weeping for Tammuz because that's part of the ritual. The women crying. It's a multi-day thing. It's a big, big festival in the springtime. And so there's multiple days of it. And one of the days is the women are all crying and weeping for the dead god. And then he comes back to life. And that's going to represent springtime. And then they go have a big party and they get drunk and they get high and they have sex and they have ritual sex. And so ritual prostitution is absolutely a thing. And the priestesses, we don't know the details, so I don't want to overstate the case. We don't know exactly what they were doing precisely, but we know these are very, very sexual cultures. If you read the writing from Mesopotamia, from the Sumerians, it's super graphic, super sexual. They're not shy about anything.
The funny thing about these priestesses, they're practicing prostitution within the temple. I believe their name was Kaddish, which means holy.
Exactly. The Kadesha is their name, and the word means holy. And that name gets used a lot. The transgender priests are the male. They would castrate themselves voluntarily in service of the goddess. They're the same thing as today's transgender people who are willing to, bodily, mortify their body to change their gender. This has been happening for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And they were celebrated in the ancient world. And so Ishtar, is like the most, she's the one I talk about the most. It's the same name, but different. The names get bounced around. So Aphrodite, Urania, Ishtar, Inanna, Astarte. It's all the same goddess. She's a goddess of love and war. And she's really powerful. She's not, what I want to stress is these goddesses are not tools of the patriarchy. They do not bow down to any male gods at all. Ishtar challenges all. She challenges her father. She kills her husband. She kills her rapist. She challenges the other gods for authority and steals their divine power. She is super ambitious. She is super headstrong. She's vain and arrogant and powerful and beautiful. And everybody wants to have sex with her. And she is super promiscuous. She has sex with everybody because she is sex. So she literally, every time you're having sex, that's Ishtar. So she is by definition, promiscuous. And part of her tradition is that she literally did not believe in monogamy. Like they do not believe in monogamy as a matter of principle and as a matter of culture. And so there's matriarchal bloodlines, maternal bloodlines. So if you have maternal bloodlines, you don't need to control for women's sex lives. And this is part of what the patriarchy and monotheism brings in is paternal bloodlines. And we're going to have to trace the children through the father. And then you got to control the sex lives of your wives and daughters. Otherwise, you can't tell where the seed is coming from.
Edward, it's very funny. Even with the introduction of Judaism and patriarchal taking over, they still kept the bloodline being linked to the mother.
That's true. So the patriarchy is before Judaism. It doesn't start with Judaism. The patriarchy is already there. So my timeline of history, and I'll get to the point you just made because that's a specific point about why they kept the bloodlines maternal. That was actually because they were the ones making the transition and they couldn't trust the women from the neighboring cultures. They could only trust the daughters that they had raised within their own culture. So that's why they were specific about you had to be born of a Jewish woman because all the neighboring cultures have these maternal bloodlines in non-monogamous women. And so you don't go marrying that beautiful girl from down the road because she's not going to be monogamous and you can't trust her. But the patriarchy comes in. So my timeline of history is about 12,000 years. We got 12,800 years ago is the big reset, the big mass extinction event. And that's a whole other discussion unto itself is what caused it. And about 12,000 years ago is the beginning of the Neolithic Revolution when people come out and we start to have agriculture. And so it's 12,000 years ago since now. In the first 6,000 years to about 4,000 BC, roughly, is Neolithic cultures with no war, no armies, no kings, and no signs of like, it's not to say they didn't have any conflict or never fought each other, but there's no like standing armies. There's no like dominance hierarchies. As far as we can tell, these are egalitarian cultures, and there's no evidence of warfare. And then at the beginning of the Bronze Age, around 4000 BC, is when bronze comes into play. The cultures have become prosperous enough that there's something worth stealing, and so now people start to have organized theft, basically, and they start to attack other settlements, and then you get into cycles of violence and cycles of warfare. And either you have a strong army or you get dominated by somebody else, and you don't have a choice. You have to fight. You get fight or you get enslaved. And this is where we have the beginning of slavery, the introduction of kings, all of whom are basically warlords for all practical purposes, the beginning of armies, and the beginning of civilization. This is where the first urban centers spring up with recognizable political leadership. Everything we would call civilization. Writing gets invented in due course. This is the second 6,000 years. And this is where the men start to assert themselves. And when we see the beginning of writing, which is about 3200 BC in Iraq and Sumer, it's already kings are already in charge. But the goddesses are still very powerful, and they're still highly respected. And the goddesses are, in fact, choosing the king, choosing who's going to be take control of the tribe. And we see this in indigenous cultures now, that like the women choose the male chief. The chief is a man who's like the war chief, but the women choose him. That's like another conversation. But we see this in indigenous cultures, and that's what we see when you read into the mythology and with the sacred marriage, the Hyros Gamos, we see a lot of this. And then as you trace through the writing, the trajectory of writing, you see the women steadily losing their authority and the men continually asserting themselves. And you see it in the laws, like in in Mesopotamia, they would write these big law codes. The law codes of Hammurabi are the most famous one from around 1800 BC, but they were neither the first nor the last. That's just the one that's most familiar. And they talk about the priestesses, the Kadesha that we were just mentioning. They're called the Kaditsu in the Sumerian writing. And in the earliest law codes, they are given a lot of authority. They have, high inheritance rights, a lot of they keep their money basically. And with all the ritual sex, they're making a lot of money. Like the sex temples, the temples of Inanna, the temple of Ishtar, these were the biggest, most important temples in town because hell, everybody wants to go there. Everybody has a great time. It's like a nightclub. Everybody has a good time. And so they have a lot of wealth and power. And over the course of the millennia, we see them losing that wealth and power until you get into when you put the law code of Deuteronomy of the Old Testament in line with this, you see them putting them out of business. They tell you that your daughter will not be a Kadesha. That's a specific law in Deuteronomy, is your daughter will not be a Kadesha. That's because a Kadesha had been around for a long time, and now they're being shut down. This is like the final act, so to speak, when they're being put out of business. And we don't have them at all anymore. There's like ritual sex and ritual prostitution. It's not part of our culture at all,
Sorry, Ed, I want to because we've got a lot of people watching us from the Middle East, and the one thing that I want to
I'd love to hear what you say.
Do a bit of a shock reaction here, because if you're born Muslim, if you're born Christian, or you're born Jew, your God has been introduced to you for the first time, but retrospectively. So just like when God appeared to Moses, and Moses asked him, who are you? What do I tell my people? When I go back to them, he said, well, tell them I am the father of the elder ones, the Abraham. And so he introduces himself retrospectively, that he's always been.
Says, but they did not know me by the name Yahweh.
Correct. But then we know now, through history and archaeology and so many other resources, that these gods have actually evolved. They like Darwin's sort of a theory. All gods share a common ancestor, if you wish, and they are rooted in the pagan tradition. They've actually transitioned into maybe some sort of theism, where you have gods and they have a chief god, and then ultimately into monotheism, but this is not how it started.
No, 100%. I believe that there is on one hand, I believe that gods are all projections of the human mind. But that does not make them real. And that does not mean that they're not real or that they're not important or that they're not valuable. I believe the gods are very valuable and that we need religion, frankly. Humans, because it's like we live in a mysterious world and we need some way to like mentally put it all together. And I believe that there's been a mother and a divine mother and a divine father all the way back to the cognitive leap, as far back as the human mental ability to ask these questions. You know, where did the universe come from? What are we doing here? Where are we going? Like, I believe, these questions have been with us ever since, we had the capability, since we transitioned from being dumb apes into being whatever we are as humans, semi-smart humans. We've been asking these questions. So I think that there's been a father who created the universe and a mother of all life. I think that this is a basic mental structure that has been with us all along, and that they are the parents of all the gods, so to speak, and that's who El is. El is this original sky father, and that Asherah represents these traditions of the mother. Now Asherah is now the names change, and the beauty of the pagan cultures was that they're very community based, and every community was free to change the names and come up with new stories and twist them around a little bit, whatever worked for them. But they share these roots, as you say. And then the transition to monotheism, the most important piece was to get rid of the mother and to get rid of and knock the women out of their role of having a sacred role. And that this has been a net loss. There may have been a reason why it needed to happen at that time in history, why civilization needed it or society needed it. But now I think we need to bring her back.
But I think, do you agree, Ed, that at some point there were two different types of societies? Those who have settled down within cities, and they are sort of traders and farmers, and they're settled. They've got their own communities, they've got their own routine. And the nomadic ones, the ones who sort of wander the wilderness with their herds, and they look upon the city slickers with a little bit of maybe animosity and a bit of
100%. It's we know them. They're the farmers and the shepherds in the Bible. This is Cain and Abel. So the Hebrews are clearly a nomadic shepherding tribe. That is not ambiguous. That is 100% clear. They are the nomadic shepherds, and they disdain of the people in the cities. The cities are the agricultural settlements that over time become cities. And so they're the farmers. We don't think of cities as farmers nowadays, but that's what they were in those days. The cities were the farmers, and they followed the goddesses because their biggest concern was the crops, that their crops would be good every year. And so, and these are all the Mother Earth, Mother Goddess, Mother traditions. And this is what they were concerned about. And so they've got plant drugs and they have sex and they're having these parties. It's like a nightclub. It's like a modern day urban rave, like would be right at home. Like in Australia, you guys have raves in Australia, right? Like there's nightclubs. They would be right at home in Ishtar's temple. It's kind of what they were doing. Sex and drugs and dancing, ecstatic dance, all to make the flowers grow and they'll have good crops.
But do you think
the country hate them?
Yeah. Do you think, the way I've looked at it, it's not really like men coming over to stop this from happening. They've come over to pretend to stop it from happening, but what they're doing is actually shifting the control. They still want to have sex with women, but on their own terms. They want to. Yeah, it's masquerading as we're going to do the right thing by stopping this craziness. But all what they're doing is they're shifting control from women to themselves. So they can. So in Islam, you can have 4 wives, for example.
Yeah, no, I think Christianity and Islam in particular are authoritarian religions. Like they want centralized control. They want to tell you what to think, how to believe, and not to really think for yourself so much. And at least not. You have to think correctly. You can think, but you got to think correctly. And it's all in control of the men. And the women are shut down. The women don't have sexual freedom. Because, women are pretty sexual. And given the choice, if they weren't slut shamed, women would be very sexual. Like they would not be monogamous by choice. Like you could ask the women around. I don't know the women, but like women who've experienced sexual freedom, and they would just as soon have sexual freedom and not be monogamous against their will. Like people are monogamous for a reason. Like don't get me wrong. Like I like monogamy. Like there's a reason why we settle down into like a simple couple, because that's the kind of the easiest way to be, right? Like it gets very complicated if you have like dangling lots of relationships around. But like women are sexual, and the only reason they're not is because they get slut shamed and forced not to be. And that's because we have paternal bloodlines where if you want to control for paternity, you have to control the women's sex lives. But in other cultures, they have maternal bloodlines, and that doesn't really matter. And the women are much more free. And that's a big difference. And that's something that the Bible in the Old Testament, they're imposing. They talk about the paternal lines all the way back to Adam is very, very important. Like that is a theme they repeat over and over again, because they're trying to emphasize that that's the new order that they're trying to impose.
In some other cultures, some neighboring cultures, like the Romans, for example, the adopted son was more revered, like in terms of Romulus, and sometimes be more revered than the son, the blood son. And it's interesting to have all these neighboring cultures. You've got the Phoenicians, you've got the Canaanites, you've got a lot of dynamics happening with their slight variation of the same version of a god.
Yeah, oh yeah. And, in human civilization, society is complicated. So, you got to be careful about painting with too broad of a brush, because you can always find examples of details that are a little bit different. But this transition, it's a reformation that's happening. And it's, Yahweh was a new God. And in the thing that I found really remarkable about rereading the Old Testament now is that once you recognize that Yahweh and El are two separate gods, like you can't really unsee that. And you see that Yahweh was a young God. Like El is really old. El is really ancient. And everything about the gray bearded sky father coming down from heavens and being actually pretty kind, that's El. Everything where the God is kind is El.
Would it be safe to say that he's not even Zeus? We're talking about almost Cronus, the equivalent of Cronus.
Yeah. No, he's the equivalent of Kronos, or even Uranus, even. But yeah, probably the equivalent of Kronos, really. And then Yahweh and Zeus are directly parallel. They both emerged in the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC, give or take, because that is a really traumatic moment in history. From 1200 to 1000 BC, in the entire Mediterranean is the Bronze Age collapse. It's a total civilizational meltdown where all the old cultures go away and new cultures emerge. And there's the old writing goes away, the old cuneiform writing goes away. So there's a comment here about women are very selective. Actually, for women to have multiple sperm donors is an advantage, because you get the best swimmer. You can have the same woman can have lots of sperm donors, and it doesn't really matter to her. Whichever the strongest one is, the one's going to come out. So it's in the Bronze Age collapse in both Yahweh and Zeus, and they're both new gods with emerging cultures that defeat the previous cultures. So that's what we see in Greek mythology, is about how Zeus had to wipe out. He went to war with the Titans, with the older generation, and had to defeat them. I believe that's actually just the older generation of gods, that this is just a reflection of their history, and there was an older generation of gods. And those are the same gods that the Canaanites are worshiping, because the Phoenicians, the Phoenicians survived the Bronze Age collapse. That's the one culture, like in Tyre, the city of Tyre, didn't fall. It's the one city that held on to their old gods. And the Phoenicians kept the old traditions, and they got the infant sacrifice. There was actually, and Baal and Anat are kind of like nasty, blood-soaked gods. I could actually understand why there was a Reformation, why they wanted to get rid of human sacrifice. Like that's a nasty, nasty tradition. And, Anat, who's Baal's sister lover, Baal is the big bad guy that Yahweh has got to go and defeat. Well, Baal was the way that these pagan traditions work is that the sky father, he's distant and removed from human affairs. He's not somebody who's around. He's out in space forming the cosmos. It's his son that is the king of the gods, who is the Lord, and he's the one you deal with. But there can only be one king of the gods. It's like king of the hill, and the new king of the gods has got to defeat the old king of the gods to become king. And so that's what's happening with Yahweh and Baal. Baal was the incumbent, if you will. He was the existing king of the gods when Yahweh comes in as a new god and wants to defeat him. And it's a reformation, and it's like a culture war. It's like a culture war like we're having today. Like people in town are having arguments over what traditions they should follow and what they should and should not do. And Yahweh is a reformist. He wants to end these nasty traditions of human sacrifice and idolatry and public sex rituals, which I think are probably kind of gross.
This very narrative is very reflected in the very first four commandments of the Ten Commandments, where that narrative of the competing gods is quite manifested in the Ten Commandments.
Yeah. All right. So can you read the first four? Like, do you know them off the top of your head?
So I think I do have a copy. Hold on a second. It's the one with the I think the first one.
We don't need to get distracted. So, like, I'm all for like the sexual freedom and the goddesses, but I can understand why the ritual sex could have gotten completely out of control. Like, it could have gotten completely out of hand. Some of the writings they're really graphic, and if you just take them at face value, it's like, wow, like that's kind of intense stuff that they would have been doing,
Here they are, Ed. First one, you can see the first few very much reflect the narrative.
Yeah, you shall know the gods before me. When they talk about I'm a jealous god, Ishtar is the one he's most jealous of because she was the one who's most popular. But you shall know the gods, make no idols for sure. Don't take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Sabbath day, that's honor thy father and mother, no murder. See, most of these are actually just fine. I don't have any issues with any of these.
Yeah, but, just the first three very much suggests that there is a competition of gods because
it's clearly not monotheism. They were clearly not monotheists. Monotheism was a new idea at an identifiable point in history.
So do you think that the word Elohim, the being plural in the Hebrew language, is maybe reference to those multitudes of gods?
Yeah, I would say so. Again, I'm not, the most learned scholar on the subtleties of the language, but from my perspective, of course, definitely. I think there is the notion of an original father, but that, like I said, he's distant and out in space. And it's there's a million gods that he's the father of.
Ed, some of the audience are asking whether you have an Arabic version yet.
No, there's not. I'm working on some art projects. That's what we're working on these days.
Here's the book, guys. I love the artwork, Ed, and I'm sure within the pages there'll be absolutely gorgeous artwork.
Yeah, it's all obviously that's an old oil painting. But we filled it with as much good art as we could. I really that's the stuff. I love the art. It's a big motivating factor for me.
So the lion and the lioness, they are a sort of a repetitive sort of theme.
Yeah, the lions were big symbols of the goddess. Asherah, like Ishtar and Anat, they would ride goddesses. They would ride lions into battle, and Asherah kept a pride of lions as her pets. And she talks about it. If you ever read the Baal cycle, that's the main piece of Canaanite mythology that they discovered just in the last 100 years that is so radical because it shows all the gods that they talk about in the Old Testament in action. El and Astarte and Anat and Baal, like it's Baal's whole story. And you see how Anat is the one, I call her she who must not be named, because Asherah and Astarte are mentioned repeatedly, but they're always being insulted. They're always being denigrated, talked down about, called foreign, called bad. They're always saying something bad about them. But Anat, they don't even mention. Now, and that is because to name something is to give it power, is to give it identity. And Anat is, if you're familiar with the Hindu gods, Anat is like Kali. Kali is the death goddess who's covered in blood with a skull necklace, and a bloody sword and a decapitated head. That's her back in the back of my wall, back in the back there.
And isn't there sort of a version in the Jewish folklore?
Yeah,
Lilith?
so Anat, that's Anat. She's the equivalent of Kali. She wears a skull necklace and she's covered in blood and she delights in slaughter, and she's Baal's sister lover. And so this is the divine couple of the Canaanites, is Baal and Anat, and they are both utterly blood soaked. They are not if you think Zeus is a tough god to the Greeks, Baal is really quite terrifying. Like every time he encounters people, he's just killing them kind of wantonly.
So
And
it would be the equivalent of Hades, I guess.
No, Hades is his brother. So there is Baal, Yam, and Mot are the three big Canaanite gods, are the equivalent of Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. And Baal, in the Baal cycle, Baal first has to fight Yam, Poseidon, to become king, because Yam was originally king of the gods, and then Baal had to defeat him, and Asherah and El had to give their approval of Baal becoming the new king.
So Yahweh really is a puny god. Like Yahweh is very little in comparison then. Yeah,
Yahweh was just a tribal little god coming out of nowhere. But then what happens with Baal is Baal gets a little arrogant, a little too big for his britches, as we would say here in America. And he decides that he's going to defeat Mot as well, Hades, the god of death. And so Baal goes to fight Mot, and the other gods get upset about this, and they say, no, you cannot defeat death. And so they order Baal to submit to Mot. And so this is how Baal dies. And so Baal is killed by Mot. And then the other gods are so upset. Anat is so upset that she goes, pretty earlier in the story, when Baal first defeated Yam to become king of the gods, he did not have a temple. And so they needed to go to El to ask for permission to build a temple, to build a house for Baal. So Anat's approach to her father El, the sky father, is to threaten to kill him. She goes up to him and says, give us what we want, or I'm going to smash your skull in, and I'm going to make your gray beard run with gore, and I'm going to tear your mighty house. I'm going to tear your house down. And this is how she talks to her father. And what does El do? What is El's response to his daughter coming up and threatening to kill him? She gives him everything she wants. He doesn't challenge her at all. He doesn't say, no, how dare you say this to me? He says, oh, you're so terrible, my mighty daughter. And he gives her everything. And she says, oh, you're very wise. Thank you, El. And she goes on her way.
Such a badass.
He's a badass. And so then after Baal is killed, she goes and finds Mot, Hades. She grabs him by the collar and says, give me back my brother. And then she pulls out a sword and cuts him in half, grinds him up with a sieve, burns him with fire, and feeds him to the birds. And with that, Baal is resurrected and brought back to life. And she places him on the throne.
It's interesting to see the resurrection of male gods always have to happen through a female goddess.
Yep. Because these goddesses are cycle of life traditions, and they're directly in contrast to immortality traditions that the monotheists promote. Monotheism tells us one soul, and that your immortal soul goes to heaven or hell and is lived in this linear, eternal future. The goddess traditions are all circular. They're all cycle of life traditions. And this is one of the core things that changes in the transition from the maternal to the paternal, is we've lost sight of these cycle of life traditions. And this is what all the every single one of these dying and rising God traditions is about, a cycle of life. And so back to Anat, just think about this for a second. So this is one of the chief goddesses they got to get rid of, because she just does not correspond to any kind of patriarchy at all. She challenges El. She's going to crush El's skull and make his gray beard run. She's going to smash his brains in. And she says it repeatedly and in multiple stories, not just in one story either. This is how she talks to her father all the time. And so this obviously does not compute to a patriarchal monotheistic culture. They have to get rid of these goddesses. Same thing with Ishtar. She is not subservient to any males. And so the Greeks are doing the same thing, mind you. It's totally parallel to the Hebrews. They're totally contemporary with one another. Patriarchy credited with ending. I think with civilization, we get more male dominance, and patriarchal religions emerge as a part of civilization as we know it. But, civilization is changing again. In the 21st century, we're going through some pretty radical changes. So things can change again. But the Greeks are totally parallel. And so Zeus and the Olympians are a reformation of their own. And Zeus reorders the house of the gods so that all the goddesses are subservient to him. None of them challenge Zeus ever, with one exception, which is Demeter in the Eleusinian Mysteries. Now, I could be wrong about this, but in my understanding of Greek mythology, that's the only story where a goddess tells Zeus to fuck off and he's powerless to do anything about it. Because Demeter is going to kill everybody with a famine if Persephone is not brought back from the underworld. And Zeus is forced to go down to Hades and tell him to give up his bride. And otherwise Demeter is going to kill all of life. So that's the only story I know of where the goddess does not submit to the patriarchy. And Demeter is an old goddess. She is from these older traditions that survives into the Olympians. She's one of the older traditions.
So, Edward, as we advance, like once patriarchy is taken over and the monotheist religion sort of started to emerge, women sort of started to disappear, but they still somehow in the background. Mary Magdalene, the Virgin Mary. There are some little representations.
Yeah, you can't get rid of her altogether. You can't get rid of her altogether. It's like pushing on a balloon. The air's got to go one direction or another. So, they get repressed, especially in Europe, but also in the Arabic culture or in the Islamic cultures. Sexuality gets repressed, sort of like partying, if you will, ecstatic dance, all this sort of like what's considered very sinful behavior from a conservative Christian perspective. All this stuff gets really repressed, but it never goes away. It was always there. It was there all the way through European history. There was always pagans in European history. They never completely went away. Around the year 1000, there's a papal proclamation condemning the ongoing worship of the goddess Diana, who was mentioned in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul goes to the Temple of Diana, Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. Diana never went away, and she becomes Wonder Woman. She literally is Wonder Woman. She never went away. These traditions just live on and on and on, and they never are completely forgotten. And it's just because part of it is just deeply rooted in the human psyche. Like Mother Earth, Mother Nature. You could go to any part of the world today and ask them about Mother Earth and Mother Nature, and we could have a conversation about it. It would translate to their culture.
There was a scene in Avengers, one of the Avengers movies. I think it was the End Game, and it was highly criticized because they've ensembled all the female superheroes, and some of them are gods, like Diana. That's Wonder Woman. She's a god, right? A goddess,
right.
Amazonian goddess. And that scene had only just the female superheroes and goddesses. And I remember all the guys in the cinema were like, what the hell was that about? That's her. But I thought it was a great scene because it's almost celebrated an epoch that we had. We had that sort of thing at some point.
I think we're going to bring it back. We're cyberspace is a new generation of humanity is being born right now. Look around, like we're through the looking glass as a civilization. We can't go back to the old ways. I think what I think is happening right now in human history, I mean, a lot of things going on, but among is that we're witnessing the breakdown of the old religions. Here in America, where I am, we can watch the breakdown of Christianity in real time. People are leaving the churches in droves. And our Protestant traditions are breaking down in America. And people are either leaving the church or they're doubling down on the church. And so the people that are doubling down, who are remaining, are becoming increasingly radical fundamentalists. And I think, I'm not an expert on Islam and I don't want to overstep, things in the Islamic world, but, that's what I see happening in the Islamic world as well. The people are either leaving or they're doubling down. And it's a very dangerous time because reformations historically are bloody, ugly affairs. where people really, kill one another. When Christianity first came in and they threw the pagan traditions out in the 4th century, it was bloody. It was violent. And I think, I think we're in dangerous times right now where the old religions are breaking down, but new religions haven't emerged yet. And so it's a very chaotic time because people don't really know what to believe anymore. It's like, it's just very uncertain.
But I mean, when you really look at this is I'm an atheist, so I don't believe in any superpowers. But the reality still exists. There is a struggle in the dynamics of control between male and female, and they're missing the whole point that they're needed equally, and
Sure.
they're good at different things. Can we reach an era of equilibrium where male and female celebrated equally for the things they can offer the world and themselves?
I think so. I've got daughters. I try to raise them to be, strong, independent females. And yes, I absolutely do. The thing about religion, atheism, I'll tell you why I'm not an atheist. And it's not that it's not that I believe that these are. The wise man has always understood that the gods are projections. These are literary, figurative projections. Socrates and Plato talked about this stuff. People invent these gods. Like somebody invented the name Yahweh. Somebody at some point, there was some guy, we call him Moses, but whoever it was, said, I'm going to start following this new god named Yahweh, and I'm going to make a new temple and some new rules. We do this because people need something to believe in. And more importantly, groups of people need a common set of beliefs to rally around. And you need to have something to bring a community together with a common set of beliefs. If people don't believe in anything, then there's nothing to bring people together around in common. And then you don't have a community. And this is what this is what I've learned having left the church when I was 18 and raising a family without bringing them to church, was that we lack those communities. And it's not that I wish I'd raised my kids in the church. I don't. I don't believe in Christian theology. It doesn't make a lick of sense. I wouldn't raise my children that way. But I recognize that we're missing those communities and that those communities are important, and having a common set of beliefs. And it's kind of arbitrary what those beliefs are. You just got to believe in something. You got to believe in something identifiable. And people say, oh, well, I believe in science. Well, you know what? Science is downstream of what you believe in. Science is done by scientists. Science is done by people who have beliefs. They go to the lab. If you believe in the environment, you're going to go do science that proves climate change. If you believe in racism, you're going to do science that proves white people are smarter than black people because of the skull measurements. That was science for 200 years until the culture changed and they threw out the whole thing. Beginning to end. Yeah. They didn't remeasure people's skulls and say, oh no, you read the skull measurement data wrong. No, they threw out the whole project because this culture didn't believe in racism anymore. So science is downstream of what people believe, and you still got to believe in something. And personally, I believe in Mother Nature. I actually have come to recognize what indigenous people teach, that the living earth is one big web of life. It's one big creature. And we are cells in a larger creature. And we actually have a responsibility to this living web of life to make the living web of life.
So we're not that far away from each other, Edward, because I'm going to introduce you to my version of atheism, which is, I think it's the more sophisticated, and a lot of people are sort of adopt this sort of view at this point. I'm not an anti-theist, so I believe religion served a very, very, very good purpose for its time. And I believe it's a reflection of the human condition, that we're here, we're trying to make sense of things, we're trying to have interesting stories to keep us going. Because otherwise, I believe, like nihilism, and you don't want to go into despair. So you want to keep going, understand all of that. But what we do is, I believe that they were so good. These stories were very important. But while I'm replacing them, and that's reflecting Nietzsche and Karl Marx views, because they were very, very scared that people will lose everything, even though they were atheists themselves. So they want to replace that void. Before you take away that sort of thing, you want to replace that that foundation, and you replace them by understanding that we still have each other. We will create our own stories. We will replace these superstitions that will demand crazy stuff of you to something to reflect the human experience, the current modern human experience. So we're here. We've got a challenge. The bloody planet is on fire. With the climate change, we've got a lot of common projects as humanity to work on, without having to resort to crazy cuckoo stuff. But we can still stick together.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has. I mean, the gods are symbols, and it's all a question of how do you understand these symbols and what do they mean for you. Mother Earth is language. It's a metaphor, but it also speaks to something real. Like, I think the Earth is genuinely a single living organism. Like, I genuinely believe that, and that we are part of it. Like, in our bodies, there's also the little creatures running around. We got bacteria and little tiny little creatures you can't really, that are too small to see, that are running around all over the place. The forest is not just a collection of trees; it's a big single organism. It's a living, interconnected web. And I think we have a duty to that. And so, to talk about Mother Earth as the wife of God, does that mean my version of God is a deist God, like something put the universe in place. We don't know what it was. It's a mystery. It's a total mystery. What gave us physics and gravity and spiral galaxies? I don't know. I don't think anyone else really knows either. It's a mystery. So we call that mystery Father. He put the universe in place, for lack of a better explanation. And then the mother is the mother of all life. Like, to me, those are not, yes, they're metaphors. They're symbols. But they work for me. So that's why I don't consider myself an atheist, because I can.
What do you think
have mystical experiences that are part of the conversation too?
What do you think of the God of Spinoza? The one who does not get involved, but he is the initiator of all the conditions.
Yeah.
At the very start,
like, he's not involved in human affairs. Like, he puts things out there. Like, there's a mystical experiences to be had, but we're created to suffer and die, as far as I'm concerned. Like, that's Buddhism. Like, life is suffering, and then you die. Like, if God didn't want us to suffer, he wouldn't have created us this way. Like, clearly, the default condition is that we're going to suffer and then we're going to die. And any pleasure you have between now and then is is a joy. And like, that's why I want to have some joy. And you want to make the world a better place for having been here. And in my experience, like, that's not a justification for like hedonism, because like hedonism is actually not very satisfying in my experience. Like, just take and take and take and like have self-indulgent experiences. It's fun for a while, but it gets old pretty quick. Whereas if you live a life of giving, something you learn as a parent, like, it's nothing but giving and sacrifice, but somehow it's so much more rewarding. Or people who do charity work, they feed the poor every day and they live a life of poverty, and yet there's so much more. They have so much more joy and satisfaction in their lives because they spend everything giving, and they can live their lives with a smile. Whereas the people that are taking are bitter and full of bile, even though they like live a life of luxury. So I think that you can read these wisdom traditions and you can learn from them, and the ancients, the wisdom traditions that have survived for a reason, and they're worth reading them and worth understanding them. And the ancient wise men were not atheists.
What about life after death? Do you have any belief in that?
It's a mystery to me. My parents raised me to say that when you die, it's lights out and it's curtains until it's all over. And maybe that's true. In the Eastern traditions, they have very elaborate beliefs in reincarnation, and I'm very influenced by Hindus and Buddhism, and I'm very interested in all that stuff. And so I read it and I say, well, maybe that's true. Or maybe it's, we come back right here on earth, and heaven and hell are right here on earth. And if you do good, you come back in a better life. And if you do bad, you come back in a more punished life, and there's some sort of karma. And maybe that's true. Well, I guess we'll find out when we get there. I don't really know. Those seem to be what the options are.
Yeah. Well, Pascal's wager is talking about, maybe you should take a wager on one of the gods, but he was talking about the Christian God, and I think he's got his math wrong, even though he's a mathematician, because he was just, presuming there's just the one God, but with the 4,200 and probably way more than that number, to be honest.
Yeah, I have a hard time with the Christian God.
Yeah.
The older I get, the more I think Christian theology doesn't make any sense. It didn't make sense to me as a child. And then as I studied it as an adult, I know it doesn't make sense. So I don't really worry about. So for me, everybody, when I say the word God and you hear the word God, and I've got my own idea in mind of what I mean when I say God, and you've got your own idea in mind when you hear the word God, and everybody else, we've all got our own ideas of what it means. I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that.
Even within Christianity itself or Islam, you've got 1.7 billion Muslim and 2.3 billion Christians. And if you ask each of them about their version of God, you'll have a slight different variation. I think there's as many gods as people. Basically,
which is why the Sky Father, who is the father of all the gods, that's the one we can all agree on, because everything else is culture. But there's one original Sky Father. That's El, and that's what the Israelites were doing. That's what Abraham was doing, bringing back the worship of El, because El had actually kind of gotten knocked aside in, Abraham comes from Mesopotamia. This is what the Bible tells us. Well, in Uruk, which was the first major city in the world, they had a temple. El was named On over there, and the first major temple we had was. That's my old website, and then I've got some other websites too.
Yeah, there's another one in the description, guys. And I think, is this your Spotify? Is that right?
Yeah, I've got lostgoddess.io is where I'm going to be doing all my work going forward. I'm about to pull that website down and redo it. I've got historyofthegoddess.com and lostgoddess.io, but I'm going to, in the coming month, literally in the next couple of weeks, I'm pulling that website down. I'm doing a whole new art project now. I'm turning all this stuff. I'm more interested in the storytelling at this point and the mythology of it. So I'm doing Gnostic Mystery Jesus is the first story. Talking about the resurrection from the Gnostic perspective and Mary Magdalene and the Gnostic version of the mother. And then I want to do Epic of Ishtar. Yep, that's it. That's got the links to everything. Then I want to do the Epic of Ishtar, where it talks about the story I was getting into, which is how in Sumer, On was the Sky Father, and they built this fabulous temple to him called the White Temple on one of the first ziggurats. And this, the archaeologists have found this thing. But then later on, and still in the talking 3200 BC, still a long time ago.
There's a question for you, Ed, here.
The Islamic version of God. So I'm not an Islamic scholar by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm just a layperson. But in terms of, so they don't talk about, Allah seems to be closer to El than Yahweh, but it's like a blending of both, I guess. But the name Allah etymologically comes from El. I know that much. And the one bit I like is from the Quran that I have studied is the satanic verses, the one that got Salman Rushdie all in trouble, because that's where they've got these same goddesses again. What's her name? Alat, and there's three of them. It's a triple goddess, and it's the same triple goddess, mother, maiden, and death.
Yeah, it's Hubal, Alat, and Al-Uzza.
Exactly.
And
so, and this was the moment when the Arabs had to have their transition to monotheism, and this was the final, the final step was to get rid of the goddesses, because you're putting the women down in your community. You're pushing the women out. This is where you finally got the hijab on them completely, and they've got no rights at all. Because if you've got these goddesses are like icons. They don't. I can't emphasize enough that these goddesses do not submit to the patriarchy. That they're not just do what the men tell them to do. And if you're going to control your women, that's them. You can't have these characters in your culture. You have to eliminate them. This is why they get rid of Ishtar and they get rid of Astar. They don't want them.
It's almost like history repeats itself in different cultures. It just doesn't matter where you go. You'll have a bunch of gods to start with competing, and then they sort of combat and kill each other, and you end up with some stronger than some other, and some will sort of
definitely with the king of the gods. Absolutely with the king of the gods, because that represents these represent political shifts. One new king is coming along, a new culture comes in. There's been a big war and you've been defeated, and whatever your conquering empire coming in is going to impose their new gods, and specifically they're going to impose their king of the gods on your king of the gods.
Yeah, I think a lot is also, I think it's the variation of El.
Yeah, I think these are the feminine version. I'm not an expert on this etymology, but my understanding that's the feminized version of the same name.
Yeah. And I think Allah was already there as one of I think it's the crescent god, or god, the moon god.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's very similar, and you'll find that throughout the sort of the Middle East, that sort of area.
Yeah, there's definitely the Indo-European traditions clearly have a repeating motif that repeats over and over again. Right, the daughter of Allah, and so Allah, like being the Sky Father, he's the father of all the gods, right? So it depends on where you place them in the hierarchy in the story. I guess, like, as you write new stories, you can retweak them, you can put them in whatever order you want, and then you get is what is the prime mover, and what is the original one, mother or father? So in the oldest stories, the very origins of creation are chaos, and the chaos is the mother, and the mother gives birth to the father, who brings order from the chaos, because the chaos was already there. Or she's born from the waters. In Genesis 1, 2, in the Genesis story, the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the face of the waters, because the waters were already there. The waters was the mother. The mother was already there. She gave birth to her own mate. And this is, in the Greeks, it's Gaia gives birth to Uranos, and they are the original divine couple. For the Sumerians, it's her name is Namu, and she gives birth to the creator gods. Tiamat in Babylon is the original. It's the salt waters. They believed everything came from the salt waters, and the salt waters was the divine mother. It's the womb of Mother Earth. The oceans are the womb of Mother Earth, which is in fact where life does come from. Modern science and biology and evolution tells us that life comes from the oceans, which is exactly what the ancients were teaching us. Like, the mythology is not dumb superstition. They knew stuff. Like, they had insights, and that they're couching them in this poetic language. And when you decipher the poetry, you can see that the ancient people knew quite a bit. Like, and yeah, they were wrong about stuff too, but the stuff that was wrong gets forgotten, and the stuff that gets preserved for a reason. So I think I have a lot more respect for the ancients. I think they knew a lot of stuff that we give.
I tend to agree. I would tend to agree. Just to, it's mixed with other bits and pieces, but definitely there's some information there. And look, I mean, again, I'm an atheist who's fascinated by the old stories, because you have sort of ex-Muslims coming on YouTube and ripping the Quran to pieces, or the Bible to pieces, and I don't like this sort of thing, because I think, even if it's not true, it reflects the psychology of people then, and therefore it's so valuable.
For a long time. You can't say these religions are so terrible. When they worked, they were stable for a long time. My problem is this. I'm just going to speak to my Christian experience, is that they're authoritarian, and they tell you what to believe, and then anything that's outside that envelope is like, you're a heretic and you're going to be burned at the stake. Like, I have a real problem. I have a bit of a problem with that. Like, as a Protestant, I'm like, I can see why we had a Protestant Reformation, and I consider myself a child of, Martin Luther said everyone should go home and read the Bible for themselves. Like, that was revolutionary 500 years ago, because the Catholic Church discouraged people from reading. They didn't want you reading the Bible. They didn't want you to know the mysteries. And so when Martin Luther and the printing press was invented at the same time, you actually had access to create Bibles for people to read it for themselves. That was it's literally revolutionary. and it changed everything. So now for the last few hundred years, people have been reading the Bible, and then they started doing archaeology. Now we have 200 years of archaeology and modern scholarship, and now we can see that these claims of authority just don't stack up at all. Like the things that they claim to be authoritatively true, like the 6,000 year history or whatever. I mean, all these things that we know is definitively not accurate. So we know that the Bible is not literally true, and we know their authority doesn't stack up.
Just the polarity of that sort of chemistry. You've got the when females were in control, they're very inclusive. Everything goes, which is great up to a certain degree. That's why chaos comes to
right.
Yeah. And then the masculine attitude comes that is so exclusive. It gives a little bit of discipline, but when it takes over, it becomes so alienating. You should do this or else, sort of thing.
Exactly.
So I think the mixing of the two, where you have the freedom and the discipline to know when you're just completely gone cuckoo, sort of thing, you mix the two together and you get some balanced society. Are we ever going to achieve this balance?
I certainly hope so. I am an optimist by nature, and I think we're going to go through some rough stuff in the coming decades. I think the 21st century is going to be some pretty dramatic times for humanity, but I do think we can come out of it. The coming generations, there's always reason for hope. If we don't completely nuke ourselves, I think that we can. I totally think I'm really, cyberspace and the internet can either be a tool of totalitarianism or a tool of, of a new golden age. It could be either one. We don't know how it's going to pan out. But I do think we can bring back the feminine, and that's kind of what I'm working on with the art projects. Another thing about being an atheist is that is anything sacred? If you're an atheist, is anything sacred? And I think things are sacred. So,
I, as an atheist, I held certain things sacred. I do. I mean, you don't have to. The word "sacred" here needs to also be sort of re-explained. What do you mean by that? It's to me, it's the stuff that is important for me to keep. So I want to keep humanity together. I want us to look after the planet that we're on, our home. I want us to be happy. I want us to get together. All these are very important things to me. So it's not like I think that maybe there is some atheistic version of attitude where it's completely. I disagree with it. Where religion is completely wrong. That these people were evil. I wish it's never happened. That is crazy. I don't want to deal with that sort of atheism. I'm a negative atheist anyway, so I'm the one who would say I don't know. At the very end, I would say I don't know. There could be a creator, but I don't know yet. If he does not want to get discovered, I will never be able to do that. So it's very difficult for
mystery.
me.
The word is mystery. That was
does
the word.
He want to declare himself? Or does she want to declare herself? That's the thing.
Well, see, the mother is very intimate. That's the thing. The father is distant and out in space, but the mother is very intimate. The mother we can touch and feel, and the mother is Mother Nature. You can go put your fingers right in it and curl your toes in it and smell her and taste her. It's all very intimate. This is what in the Catholic tradition, the Virgin Mary is the accessible side of God. She is the one you pray to because God is far away, but the Virgin Mary is the one that's why you have.
But then Christianity introduced this Jesus story where it tells us, oh, hold on a second, God has always been distant, and that sort of aloof father of the baby boomer dad who sort of brings food on the table, and that's about it.
Right.
But then Jesus comes on earth. So no, I'm the modern dad. I'm the modern family. I'm the guy. I'm the cuddly dad who's going to take you to the soccer game and watch you and cheer you up while you're playing. So. Is there a version?
I mean, Christianity did some really profound things. Because the message of Jesus in Christianity was that everybody's loved. No matter how low of a person, slaves, women, whatever you were, even if you were a despicable criminal, you were still received the grace of God through his son. And that was actually a very powerful message because that was not a message that the pagans had. The pagans, if you were low, you were low. and you weren't necessarily loved. But so I think there was, and this is where we get our modern ideas of individual human rights. All comes from this notion that like God loves us all and that God is within us all. Like that is something that Christianity kind of introduced, at least relative to Roman era paganism. I'm not saying other cultures never said anything like that, but relative to what they were replacing, there was a reason why that message stuck, I think. And even if so much of the other stuff doesn't make sense at all. I mean, parts of Christianity are good, you know.
And humanity has a habit of ruining and screwing things up. Like, you know, the reincarnation, which is, it's an interesting concept and kind of makes sense. But then humanity takes it. Well, I think we are the source of it, but we like to tamper with things. And you end up with the caste system in India, which is a horrible, horrid thing on the back of reincarnation.
Yeah, I mean, that is the big criticism of Hinduism for sure, is the caste system. I mean, even the Hindus themselves will tell you that's their biggest problem. So, yeah, we do have, you know, we get stuck in our ways and we get authority fetishes. I mean, I see Christianity as like an authority fetish religion. Like they really take authority like way too far. And, you know, the Hindu, the caste system and reincarnation, it's a very deep, that's a whole profound discussion unto itself. The one I want to get back to is the resurrection, because this is something I'm working on right now. I don't know if I showed you this paper I wrote, which is a defense of the swoon theory. There's a position that Jesus simply survived the crucifixion, and that the reason why people saw him alive was because he was in fact alive. I mean, the Muslims say this. I mean, the Muslims say that either was a substitute or he survived. And, you know, it's actually perfectly reasonable to think that the guy could have survived. And the argument I make, you know, I didn't invent this argument, I'm just presenting it, is that the women sedated him. They fed him a drug that if you're familiar with the story, he gets a taste of wine vinegar immediately while he's on the cross. Yes. They feed him wine vinegar. And 3 of the Gospels have this detail. So it's an important detail. They give him wine vinegar, which, you know, what is wine vinegar? No one knows what wine vinegar actually is. It's a euphemism for a mystery potion. And then he immediately expires. They bring him down from the cross after just being up there a couple hours. He's not up there very long at all. And then they bandage his wounds, put him in a tomb, and he sleeps for a day and a half. And then he's alive. So the argument is that he's being sedated. They're giving him a drug. And we argue that the drug is cannabis, because a cannabis tincture would actually do this. We actually have the science. We can test this. Extremely high doses of cannabis, they will not kill you. It's like that. There's 0 deaths from cannabis for healthy people, but it can knock you out for 2 days. And under certain circumstances, give you catalepsy, which is where your limbs get stiff and you basically look like a corpse. Like, this is documented science. It's all in my paper. And so the argument is, like, this is just a theory. I'm not saying it's a fact. I'm not trying to like say this is definitively what happened, but it's a straight reading of the text. It's a very
I mean, I'll go with that, because there is no supernatural elements in there that these things can happen.
It's totally reasonable. It is totally reasonable, and it totally follows the text. And it puts the women at the center of the story, because the women would have been the ones who did it. These kinds of potions were the things that the mystery religions are, these dying and rising God traditions. They were the most important ones. They totally did this stuff. They totally had all these psychedelic potions and had plant drugs. And so this was women's business. Women mixed plant drugs in the ancient world. Men didn't do it. Women did it. Women did weaving. Women did midwifery. There was all sorts of important jobs in society that were women's business. And plant drugs was one, you know, making medicines. And it's not to say there was never any men that did it, but like by and large, this is women's business.
I don't know. You're watching Wheel of Time at the moment. It's a TV series happening at the moment where it shows they call them wisdoms, and these like the witches of the time. And
they're witches. Totally. So that's what I'm saying. Like, Jesus got raised by a bunch of witches who had this mystical potion that they cooked up in a cauldron like Macbeth. And so obviously, and I don't even think it would have been a secret, but like, I talked to Robert Price about it. Dr. Robert Price, if you're familiar with him, he said he thought that swoon theory was the predominant theory for centuries, that people simply believe this guy survived. Like, it's not unreasonable at all to think that the guy but then he was really badly wounded. Probably his wounds get infected and then he dies 40 days later.
And that will explain his resurrection and meeting Thomas and sharing like, I'll feel my holes because they're there.
And it's also why the stories are so vague, because they don't talk about him being all bloody and wounded and like bandaged. You know, the stories are like, oh, he's a ghostly apparition, and then he disappears after 40 days. It's like he was around long enough for people to see him, a bunch of people to see him, and for the stories to spread. But then he dies quietly, and they bury him.
But you're not going to follow obviously the Dan Brown story where has gone to France and.
No, I mean, I'm just my hypothesis. I'm just taking a straight reading of the text. A straight reading of the Bible is that he ascended to heaven after 40 days. All right, so he died after 40 days. That's my position. We're doing an art project though, and I've got a guy who's done a bunch of art for me. It's pretty wild, depicting some of the scenes, and I've married it up with the Gnostic texts, like the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, where they talk about the Divine Mother, and they talk about how Mary Magdalene was the apostle to the apostles, and Peter was bitterly jealous of her and was trying to kick her out because Peter was jealous of her closeness to Jesus, and that she had all of the she knew all Jesus' secrets, like how he survived the resurrection, because she's the one who did it. They weren't just witnesses; they were fully responsible for the resurrection. And so we're telling it as like a new story. It's like a new mythology. That's what I'm trying to do.
This is insane. I mean, we talked about just off air about that movie Mother, and I'll type it in here for people to. It's a must watch because it's got that dynamic, the conflict between male female. They're so in love, and there are some moments where they hate each other's guts. You know, it's almost like I can't.
True love. Yeah, that's true love. That you can only hate the one you love.
Yeah, it's akin to modern day marriage. You know, it's you know, you can't live without them, but sometimes you want to kill them, sort of thing. but and it's incredible. This is a sort of dynamic, and who should be in control, and it's fascinating stuff. And whether the universe has started like that from the conflict between the polarity, positive and negative, the sort of opposites. You know,
yin yang, right? We got to bring it back in balance. That was Egyptian religion, was all about balance.
Well, in physics, you get that as well. Matter and antimatter. You know, it's just right. it's manifested. Maybe they have different names. Maybe we were talking about the same thing but in different language. Or maybe I talk physics and cosmology. You talk mythology. But at the very end of the day, there is some sort of commonality.
I totally think there is. I think, you know, some mythology is just stories. Some mythology is just dumb entertainment and is like nothing wisdom about it at all. But some of it is really, really important. And some mythology really does like show like genuine wisdom that is totally applicable to science and is not, because my argument is that, or my position is that truth doesn't contradict truth. So if you're really speaking the truth, no matter what language you're speaking, it all dovetails together. And so the really good mythology from the ancient world, the stuff that really counts, it dovetails with science. It totally dovetails with science. And there's no contradiction whatsoever. It's just a matter of deciphering the poetry and deciphering the mathematics. And it comes together.
So, Edward, we're sort of reaching towards the end of the chat, but are you working on something at the moment? Is there a new book?
Yeah, no, it's themostgoddess.io. I'm actually doing a virtual reality art gallery. I've got a bunch of art. We'll do some. We might mint it as NFTs. But yeah, I want to do mythological storytelling, and so the Gnostic Mystery Jesus is the one I'm doing right now, and then Epic of Ishtar is a longer one where I take the stories of Inanna, Ishtar, and Astar of the Bible and put them all together into one, sort of long narrative. And you see the rise and fall of the goddess, of the great Bronze Age goddess. So I'm really excited about that. That's actually going to be a longer story. And yeah, art and mythology and like in virtual reality, some of these virtual reality spaces is what I'm working on.
That is very interesting. I mean, you're going to continue the journey. Obviously, you want to delve even deeper. You want to get into each of the character and get into their virtual heads and understand how it. But it's very strange because also the way that sort of belief reflected on cultures.
I think we need to bring back the goddesses. Like, if you want, the women are not going to be equal in a world where there is no goddess. Again, this is why I'm not an atheist. Like it's rather than get rid of God, I want to bring back goddess, because it serves the same purpose in undermining the authority of the church. Like if you're a Christopher Hitchens fan and you want to undermine the church, bringing back goddess is just as powerful as tearing down God. In fact, I think it's more powerful.
Well, I just finished reading his book again, because it was, I think a couple of days ago it was his 10th memorial.
Yeah, so there's no one does it better than Christopher Hitchens in skewering the Catholic Church. Like that guy is the best. It is a delight to listen to him. His knowledge of history and of the reality of the politics of it all and the hypocrisy of it all. Nobody does it better. But I gotta have some criticisms of him too, because when you throw it back at him and ask about his morality and stuff, he really falls down. And he's got some pretty bombastic ideas I don't really agree with. But in terms of skewering the history of the Catholic Church, like he's right on target, 100%. I love it. It's
awesome.
I
mean, and that's the balance we're trying to achieve. I'm the big fan of Christopher Hitchens, but I've dedicated an episode to criticizing him. And this is something you can do. You can be completely in love with a person and still see their issues, and not be completely blind.
It's a paradox. Human beings are paradoxical. Human history is paradoxical. Like the good comes with the bad. Like social media, is it good or is it bad? I don't know yet. The jury's still out. Google, is it good or bad for us? I don't know. It's a little of both. And human beings, like here in America, Thomas Jefferson is a big, founder, he writes a Declaration of Independence, and he's, this notorious slave owner who's fathering all those children with these slaves, with Sally Hemings. He's a paradoxical figure. You got to take the good with the bad. Michael Jackson, you got to take the good with the bad,
I know.
Like, do we condemn Michael Jackson because he's a pedophile, or do we love his music,
I've had this conversation a few weeks ago, and it's quite. Dolly wanted to know, that's Christopher Hitchens. God is not great. So I completely agree. Some of the fascination of, I think personalities that have slightly darker sort of shades in their personalities make them quite interesting. I mean, Christopher Hitchens and his whiskey and smoking habits, and the guy's fascinating, and he's got some dark side, and that's probably what makes him fascinating.
Yeah, genius and crazy, they go together.
Yeah.
There's a fine line.
Edward, would you like to sort of finish up by maybe summing up the idea of your book? What were you trying to get to the readers when you finished up?
Well, this book, there was a method to the book that I wrote, which was basically I went through the Old Testament and found every reference to Asherah and other goddesses and tried to figure out what the story was. And this book was very much me writing it as I learned it. So I went through the older Mesopotamian mythology, and I take it all the way back to the Venus figurines of the Ice Age, and track a thread of history all the way. And then I take it to the New Testament too. But the idea was just to sort of document this thread of traditions of the mother, and that there is a mother. There's a mother. If you believe in God, well, there's a mother to go alongside her. And God is not alone. There is a feminine to go with the masculine. And that's my position. If you believe in God, then there's goddess as well. And if you don't want to believe in anything, then I guess you don't believe in anything.
Yeah, well, you see, one last comment here. The monotheistic gods had us believe that it's absurd to believe in a multitude of gods or a duality of gods, because there would have been chaos, because there would be disagreements. And therefore, the only logical position to have on a God is he must be one. He must be the one and the only.
Yeah, well, because they don't want to admit that he had a wife who actually has a different set of opinions from him and is going to contradict him from time to time.
Yeah, well, it might explain the world we live in, because if we have that one God, why life should be a lot more coherent than what we have at the moment.
All right.
We have issues. Well, thank you so much, Edward. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, Hanney, I really appreciate it too. It's fun to talk to you, and it's fun to talk to a different audience too. And a little feedback from the Islamic world, and would be cool.
Of course, of course. This episode is going to be subtitled. I think it takes 24 hours, so you'll have an Arabic subtitle underneath it. So a lot of more audiences around the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Morocco will be listening. Or
awesome, yeah, awesome. You know, I try to listen to your channel, but so much of it's in Arabic that I can't understand it.
yeah. Well, I think you can use the. I'll show you later on how to use the translation to go into English subtitles.
Well, yeah, subtitles, but then I got to read it all. Sometimes.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks very much. We will be having different. Thanks very much, Edward. Okay, guys, we have reached the end of the conversation, but it's not the end of the conversations with Edward, because I believe we must have them again in the future. I've enjoyed myself, and I hope you enjoyed yourself today. Chat to you later.